For this video, we're going to be talking about combination cooking methods. This will wrap up our unit on cooking methods. We've been talking about dry cooking methods and the purpose behind them and foods that are appropriate for them. In dry cooking methods, we are looking to develop flavor and browning. Dry cooking methods are appropriate for foods that are already tender. Moist cooking methods, those involved cooking that is water-based or some type of liquid that is water-based, like tomato juice or chicken stock. Those cooking methods, they tenderize food items. And so those are appropriate for things that are not as tender, either tougher cuts of meat, which if you go on to other classes, you'll learn more about the types of meat and what is appropriate for long cooking versus fast cooking. So when we are doing the combination cooking methods, we get the best of both worlds. So we have both flavor development and tenderization. So braising and stewing are going to be the two methods that we cover in the final part of this unit. This video is going to focus on braising. When we talk about braising, we are talking generally about a larger piece of meat. So a whole pot roast, a couple pounds of meat, a pork butt, a leg of lamb, a whole chicken. These things would all be appropriate for braising. Braising is also going to include less liquid than stewing. Stewing, the meat is generally cut up, or we're dealing with ground meat like ground beef. And stewing generally involves more liquid. So with braising, we want to use the dry cooking method. We want to sear the food in the hot oil. So we've been talking about how to get the Maillard reaction and making sure that our temperature and our time is appropriate to get that good sear on the outside. And that's going to develop some flavor, and it's also going to seal it up a little bit so that you don't lose as many juices in the cooking process. Once we sear the food, then we're going to partially cover it with liquid. Now the moist method comes in. That liquid is going to determine on the recipe. So it could be a stock, like a chicken or a beef stock or vegetable stock. It could just be water. It could be some wine or other alcohol. It could be a tomato juice, depending on what exactly you're making. Braising is generally covered tightly. That allows the food to self-baste inside of the pan. So you have the seared food and it is cooking with the moist cooking. A lot of times you want to flip it so that it's both dry and moist cooking. And you want to do that very slowly. You don't want to do that very fast. A lot of meats, if you boil them too hard, they will get stringy, and that's undesirable. So there's a lot of ways to add seasonings, vegetables, and how and when you add the vegetables makes a difference in how much they're cooked. When I'm doing something like a large roast, I don't like my onions to be boiled. Boiled onions do not elicit the same flavor that onions that are cooked in a fat do. So I want to make sure that my vegetables, like the onions at least, are cooked around in the fat with the meat. The carrots and the celery, I may wait more towards the end to add them so that they're not as mushy and overcooked. So braising is a long, slow cooking process for large cuts of meat, and it uses less liquid. So you sear the meat. The benefits of using braising is because a lot of these food items have tough connective tissues. You want to be able to cut it with your fork and to be able to eat it. Braising doesn't lose a lot of nutrients, which is awesome. And you may have heard the term pot roasting or pot roast, and that is the American term for braising. So when we're talking about cooking a roast, then we are talking about that braising. So I have a short little Edpuzzle video that you're going to do, but here are the instructions on how to do the braising. So make sure your pan is preheated and then your oil is preheated. Sear the meat all over. And here is a new vocabulary word. So in French culinary, you'll see the term mirepoix. So this word right here, this is mirepoix. Mirepoix is a combination of carrots, celery, and onions. That is a savory flavor base that goes into lots of food items, lots of savory foods. When you think of mirepoix, I think of when it cooks, it's aromatic and it smells, as my students often say, like Thanksgiving. So if I'm cooking down mirepoix, or if I've been cooking mirepoix, then my students will often say, "Oh, that smells like Thanksgiving." When you add tomato paste, you can pincé the mixture. And when you pincé it, you take tomato paste and you caramelize it in the fat that the meat was seared in. And that's going to brown that tomato paste to very dark and kind of brown. And that's going to give your braising liquid a nice deep flavor. And that is called the Pincé. Deglaze is another term that I've used in a couple of our labs. When you cook with the appropriate temperature, you get a nice development of what they call fawn or fond. That develops on the bottom of the pan. It shouldn't be really dark brown. It can get bitter if it's very dark brown or if it's burnt. So when you cook it, and here is kind of a picture down here. Let me pick up there you go. So down here at the bottom, you can see that there's this nice brown development of flavor in the bottom of the pan. When you add a small to the pan and you get that off and you add that to your sauce, that is called deglazing. So you swirl a small amount of liquid in a hot pan to get the flavorful bits so that we eat that. If they're burnt, then just throw them out. Don't put them into your food item, or your food item will taste bitter. So the appropriate amount of liquid is usually not fully covering and submerging the food. It depends on what you're making, the amount of liquid. Cover and finish slowly. If you have a large piece of meat that has a bone in it, it's important that they rest. So, like turkeys. So the bones get hot and they will continue to cook. We talked about the term carryover cooking. So carryover cooking is when things cook beyond the time that they're, say, in the oven or on the heat. And so you need to rest things so that they finish cooking, and that will also maximize the juiciness of your meat.